Once again, we are going back in time. This episode, it is my interview with a blacksmith. How interesting. Yes, a blacksmith named John Rais. It's always fun when I get to talk to someone who is involved in a creative activity that I know nothing about. So this is a great conversation. John also happens to be from my hometown, Burlington, Massachusetts. I did not know him growing up. I did know his older sisters. He's a bit younger than me. I'm not sure how I found him because I'm really not in touch with his older sisters, but I somehow found a blacksmith. And then when we did our pre-interview, I found out he was from Burlington, Massachusetts. Great conversation with blacksmith John Rais.
So making the decision to go to art school at 17, 18, when did that start for you?
Well, I'd always made art, in grade school, but I never knew. It wasn't that I didn't know you could go to college for it. I just never considered it. It was never a thought, and so I didn't understand that it was ever a professional path until probably my junior year. One of my main art teachers, Michael Guadagno, he really encouraged me to go to college for industrial design. And I think he said industrial design because I was taking a lot of sculpture classes and I was good at construction and modeling. And I think industrial design was something where you could justify that to parents because it was sort of like, it seemed like it had an occupation attached to it.
Sure.
And then so I said, yeah, sign me up. And then once I realized I could go to college for something I love to do, and then like my grades got better, and I just really buckled down, and everything kind of made sense to me. And then it wasn't until I got to college where I was intending on majoring in industrial design or sculpture. And when I got to college, I found welding classes, and I took glass blowing my first semester, and I just thought, no way, I'm going to do fine arts and figure out the rest later. Yeah.
Okay. So Michael Guadagno, I didn't know he had a first name.
Yeah.
I took him. I feel like I need to apologize to him at some point. I was such a bratty kid. I had him for design freshman year.
Yeah.
I think about him all the time because he was a really great teacher and I was such a behavior problem. But anyhow.
I as well. And actually, I owe a lot to him. He would give me detention all the time until I realized by senior year, because I kept getting detention for the dumbest reasons. And then I realized, he's giving me detention because he believes in me and he wants me to do more artwork. Because when you had detention, you just made art. And then I just started showing up to detention senior year with that when he wasn't giving me detention. And I would just joke to him. I'd say, I'm here for detention. And he'd smile and I'd make art. And that's when I got it, that he was trying to isolate me or so that I wouldn't be distracted by other people, and then I could make art, and it was fantastic.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, he's a real Jedi.
So you get to art school. It sounds like there's a lot of directions you can go.
Yeah, sure.
And you said, I think it was welding and sculpture. Can you tell me about what was it about that sort of activated you?
Art in three dimensions has always sort of made sense to me. I never had to it was never a bridge I had to cross. It was always right there. But yeah, so I was able to take a glass blowing class my first year. And that was because the guy teaching 3D design to me was also the head of the glass department. And so he liked me a lot and he got me into the glass blowing class. And I fell in love. I just love the physicality of it, the heating and the cooling and, the action and even the potential for danger and all that stuff, I think just was all just baked into the same bread. And I just loved it enough to where I had to stop. I stopped asking the questions of myself about what would I do for a living? I just said, I'll just figure that out later.
What do you call yourself? Do you call yourself a blacksmith?
Yeah, I do, but less and less now. I mean, I still am a blacksmith. I don't use the word as much in sort of mixed company because it just has so many inaccurate attachments to it. whether it be sword making and horseshoeing or any of those things that just have nothing to do with what I do. So most of the time, if it's like in a new conversation, I'll say I'm a metal artist or a sculptor or designer. I'm a metal designer, and what I do is I design objects, metal objects, and make metal objects that go into different situations. So in other words, I don't just make furniture. But I also do lighting, and I do some architectural work like railings, and I do other things. But what I'm most interested in is finding a really cool design idea that fits a situation. So I don't think about furniture first. I think about an idea, and then I try to think if furniture is the best avenue to fit that idea. That's kind of what I do.
Are your projects driven by like a client's need, or are you creating something based on an idea that you have and then you work with clients to find a home for it?
It's both, and it's also evolved over the years. So when I first started, I had a small group of art collectors that would call me every few months and ask, "Oh, what are you making?" And I would send them 35 millimeter slides of what I had just finished, and then they'd come over and buy it or not. And then that led to some commission work after that, but it was always commissions based on artwork I had made. And so it was sort of like taking the business model of being like a visual brand. Although I didn't use those words back then. I was just sort of growing organically. So that the fire screens I was making for commissions for people visually had a lot to do with maybe a wall piece I had made or something else. And so there was a stylistic thread that went through everything. As I grew and as I developed different clientele, I became a little bit more of a contextualist. So like designing for a specific context and not for my own visual style. Now I do both now. So now it's just a matter of like knowing what I'm getting into. So if I'm approached, I'll give one example is that when that was a big part of my career is that when in 2009, I think, I was approached by Yale University for their art museum, Yale University Art Gallery, to make a railing for the main staircase of the art museum. And it was for their permanent collection, part of a big museum expansion they were doing. And that, through a lot of discussion and consultations and design, it became apparent that what I really needed to do was make something that fit the architectural style of the building, but that had some fingerprints of myself in it. I was making a Yale railing designed by John Rais. I wasn't making a John Rais railing at Yale. That was a big pivot point in my career where I started realizing the rewards of working within a context like that.
That sounds like that would be a big adjustment. I know personally, most of my artwork is based on concepts and ideas that come from me or that I'm inspired by. Occasionally, I'll have to do a commission, which is based on a subject matter that someone else has given to me. And that's a bit of a shift, and it's a bit of an adjustment.
It's a shift and an adjustment for me, and it's not always a shift and adjustment that I find that I don't always want it. And I think I always want to do both for that reason. There are certain projects where I get, so I don't mind going back and forth, but so in other words, if I spend too many months in a row doing like architectural commissions, I start getting antsy to make speculative work more and more. And then I look for more opportunities and time in my life to do that. And so I go back and forth a lot. Because I always need to have that voice too, of just making what you want to see and then presenting that and hoping there's a place for that thing you made that's not in your own home.
Let's talk about the work that comes from inside your head and inspired from yourself, not the commission work. Can you tell me about how you get that out into the world?
Yeah. If I could walk through the process in a sort of very generalized way, I'll get an idea, and the ideas can come from lots of different places, but it could just be like a bird flies by, or anything just happens that's like a little that just disrupts your brain while you're thinking about something else, and then that causes a daydream of an object, or either a part of a sculpture or the whole thing, and then I think about how I would build it. I think about what it would be, and then if I can't get that thought out of my head, it becomes where I have to build it, and then once I decide to make it, I have to think about, what is it going to be? Is it going to be a piece of furniture? Is it going to be non-functional, or is it going to be lighting or whatever? And I think that there are reasons to make the idea of furniture as opposed to not. For example, furniture can be very intimate. It's sort of like figurative art that's about the body. It's like the negative space around the body, and so I feel like it's this it's the upside down world of figurative art, so to speak.
Interesting. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah, that's always how I viewed it. I just feel like it speaks about the proportions of the human body and how the body interacts with it. And there's something very disarming about furniture because it's this like sort of dome-style object that is more intimate. And so you can use that as a vehicle to that intimacy as a disarming way to smuggle your ideas into people's minds, through furniture. But it doesn't always have to be that way. So sometimes I feel like an idea shouldn't have the distraction of being furniture. And so that's usually the place where I decide, is furniture going to distract from the idea, or is it going to be the vehicle for the idea? And that's kind of what I try to balance out. I love making furniture too, but if the idea will suffer for being furniture, I don't do it.
But there's always a seed. Something happens that initiates this whole process.
Yeah, there's a creative seed, and that can be completely random, and often is the case, but usually has something to do with what I have just made before or what had just happened in the studio. Sometimes there'll be an element of an architectural commission. Oftentimes this happens, actually. There'll be like a small element of an architectural commission, a surface or a texture or a thing that sticks with me, and then I find a way for that to become into a more speculative piece, like an aspect of the architectural work to become into a speculative piece, a piece that would go into a gallery, because they do speak a similar language. They don't use all the same words.
When you describe that process of, a bird flying by and it causing like a disruption, it reminded me of crystal growth, because crystals grow from like an imperfection and it grows out. And that's exactly where my little crazy brain went.
Oh yeah. Sure. Yeah. And I think it takes practice of sort of living in that space to where you're willing to where you're naturally accepting that kind of inspiration, because your life can shut down those thoughts very easily if you just stay too focused on what you're doing, and what you're doing has nothing to do with inspiration. So it's a matter of reminding yourself, training your brain to accept these weird little vignettes and thoughts that pop in your head, or if someone walks by and something about their coat ruffling in the wind or whatever that is, and you think, oh, that something about there is furniture, what I just saw, or something about that is a sculpture.
So how do people purchase your work that's already created? Do they have to buy it through a gallery, or do they buy it directly through you?
Both. Now that's changing a bit now, because I have a gallery in Philadelphia, and so they're starting to sell some work. It's called the Gravers Lane Gallery, and they're in Chestnut Hill section of Philadelphia. And so I had a solo show there. Actually, the opening was June 1st. It was in the middle of the pandemic. So it wasn't an actual opening. We had sort of a closing ceremony. And then things started selling, things didn't sell on the opening day. And it started some things started moving afterward throughout the summer. Now that I have this gallery, I'm going to try to get one more gallery. I don't know where yet, but it's something I'm starting to think about now. I want to try to find another relationship as well. Growing up with parents who naturally just made a lot of things, my dad was always worked with his hands for a living and also just for around the house. And so when you grow up with that as an example, it wasn't something that was taught to me. It was just taught by example.
So he was actually creating things around in the house as opposed to repairing stuff. He was.
Well, both really, but he made a lot of playground equipment, for example, when we were young. and he'd go to like a wood mill and get a big timber and make a giant seesaw, and he'd take like metal tubing at work and weld it together for the fulcrum of it, and we'd get half of the neighborhood on this the seesaw or teeter-totter, the thing where you get on side, it rocks back and forth. And he made playground equipment, and we made, when we needed a new deck, he built the deck and helped build additions on the house. And when I wanted a go-kart, he built it at work out of steel and used like a steering column to a car and made like the sort of rack and pinion steering on this go-kart. And just things like that, was something where certainly that's where I learned the value of making things.
And the possibility that you actually can.
Yeah.
Because watching someone, as a kid, watching the process of something being created like that kind of wires your brain in a way that, I think most kids are watching their dad maybe do repairs around the house. That's different from having a vision of something that isn't in the world, pulling materials together and creating something new that's now in the world. Like seeing that as a kid, that is pretty impactful.
Yeah, and I think it's sort of like what I learned from my dad was simply the value of building things and the ability to do it. And then I already had an imagination that was where I was predisposed for some kind of creative pursuit, whether I did that for a living or not would have been up to question. And so I just married the love and ability of building with my hands with fine art.
Well, John, this was wonderful. I really enjoyed talking to you and like learning about your creative process. That was great.
Yeah, I love how this is sort of a full circle with a sort of a Burlington origin. I think that's interesting. Yeah, I got a lot of it. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Where can people take a look at your work and see what you're all about?
My website, it's called John Rais Studios, JOHN RAIS Studios, STUDIOS. And then I'm also on Instagram on, at John Rais Studios as well. That's where a lot of the stuff, the day-to-day operations you'll see, like, whatever doesn't make it onto the website, we'll get on there. We'll be on there first.
All right. Well, perfect. Well, thank you again, John.
Thank you. It was good talking to you.
My name is Ricky McGuckran, and you have been listening to Eager to Know, the podcast. If you haven't already, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join me next week for another Eager to Know podcast.